My name is Tim McDermott. I'm with the Ackerman firm in Jacksonville. I've had the pleasure of working with Magnus, including Dr. Pygott and David Faust, for well over 15 years now. It's been an excellent experience for me. I believe that my client has benefited financially. I have benefited professionally from my experience with David and Melissa. They both approached me recently and asked if I would be willing to say a word about the quality of their services, the timeliness, and I told them, as I tell you, I was more than happy to do it. My experience has been superb. I've typically used Magnus in 3 different ways over the years. The most important way, I guess from my perspective, is the high exposure case, that case where there is a lot financially at stake. I have used Magnus to conduct, in those cases, mock jury assessments, including where Magnus will proceed and gather mock juries from the same venue in which the case is going to be tried. There'll be a presentation, and a fair presentation, which with Melissa and David's assistance we'll put together, but a fair presentation of both sides of the issue with fair, active argument from counsel who will be representing both sides of the issue, presented to the mock jury for the purpose of seeing and listening to their deliberations, what they think is important, what they didn't think was important, and to get some gross reading of indications of where they might lean if that kind of case were presented to them. And frankly, we found that to be very informative and very important for my clients. In some of the circumstances, I remember a particular case where Dr. Pygott had recommended that we have a second alternative mock jury in the wings scheduled for after lunch to address a strategic issue. Specifically, it dealt with a strategic issue we were struggling with as to whether my client, a defendant, should be pointing the finger at a Fabre party in case involved electrocution. So at her suggestion, before lunch, we played it the way I thought we should play it, which is to point the finger at the third party, the Fabre. We saw the results, and then after lunch, we brought in the alternative panel, made exactly the same presentations, exactly the same arguments, with the only variable being different. The only variable we changed was, in the alternative, I did not point the finger at the third party. And I was frankly surprised at the jury deliberations and their thoughts on that and the consequence it had on their verdict. And as a result, that had a major bearing on how we proceeded with the case and ultimately how the case was resolved. But that has traditionally been the classic way I've used Magnus in my practice. But there are 2 other ways. One is I've used both David and Dr. Pygott to critically assess key issues in the case, whether those were helpful issues to me, i.e. problems with the other side that I want to take advantage of, and how would be the best way to do that, or conversely, to use their expertise and their experience over all these years in assessing problems with my case, how I package those problems, how I present those problems. And they've been very helpful in allowing me, in strategic discussions with the client, to determine issues of voir dire, proof presentation, cross-examination, and argument. Very helpful in that second respect. The third area I've used them is, and it's more basic, but that is to provide Dr. Pygott, David with significant case information, depositions, key summaries of what the case is going to be about, to allow them to assist in voir dire questions, which enabled me to accentuate, frankly, even during voir dire, some of the positives of my case and to perhaps inoculate the jury, the potential jury panel, from what are going to be negatives, downsides in my case. And I found them to be very helpful. Over the course of the many years I've used them, I found Melissa and David to be extremely prompt, very practical. They are cost conscious, clearly. When you use these services, whether it be from any of the providers, they're not cheap. But I'm a firm believer that you in fact get what you pay for. And you get what you pay for with Magnus, I found. And I think the proof in that pudding is in those instances, and I've had them, where I will hear from Melissa or David not just what I'm hoping to hear, not what I expect to hear, but rather candid advice, including, I think you ought to think about admitting liability on this case and trying damages, or you ought to do this or that. It may not be what I've particularly wanted to hear, but I listen to them and I've grown based on experience. I know that what they're talking about, and I value their judgment. So that said, I am pleased to be here to speak on their behalf, and I soundly recommend and endorse their services. You know, an additional benefit of the mock jury experience I found is it provides a great forum for a client to educate his client about the realities of the case. Until that client actually hears that mock jury deliberating and emphasizing points that I've been trying to tell them for 6 or 8 months in the case, and which they've been sloughing off, until they hear that mock jury mouth those same considerations, it doesn't have the same effect. So I do believe that the education of your client based on the discussions and the reality check that a mock jury provides is extremely helpful, extremely beneficial.